don't know when I didn't know. Just about. I got to see her as she was a very small baby and up to 2 pounds.
On time.
Oh, you're on the...
Yeah, you want to use it?
Is this too loud?
No,
Are you sure? All right, sounds very loud to me.
We're getting older.
well, anyhow, Dee Dee, it's a great pleasure to have you here tonight. So, just come on.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Good evening to all of you. What a beautiful spring evening it is.
Before you start, there's a car with its lights on. Oh. And the license plate is
217 FRI. It's a Toyota. Silver.
I think it's mine.
She'll be happy later, that's for sure. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to come and talk to you tonight. This is a very informal address. I'm going to tell you some things, and then I'm going to read a paper that I wrote for another group because I think I have a really colorful, interesting, at times funny, and just a sort of an offbeat kind of a family. This is my grandfather. I'd like you all to meet him. He's Christian Quveli, one of Tacoma's first physicians, and he was born in Norway in the Lillehammer area, which is northwest of Oslo. He was always exceedingly proud of his Norwegian heritage, and I brought pictures of some of the people that he had met that were some great Norwegians that he knew, some of the countryside where he lived. Norway, as most of you know from pictures or having been there, is a breathtakingly beautiful country with craggy mountains and deep fjords and lots of waterfalls. The people are fiercely independent, athletic, hospitable, and it has one of the highest literacy rates of any country in the world. For such a tiny country of 4 million people, Norwegians have contributed much to the world of art, music, and literature, and science. Norway is given us Henrik Ibsen, playwright, Edvard Grieg, composer, musician, Edvard Munch, famous painter, Bjornstjerne Bjornson, who was a poet and a playwright, Sigrid Undset and Knut Hamsun, both of whom won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And by the way, Sigrid Undset lived next to one of my uncles in Norway, and they were good friends, so I've heard a lot about her. And from their rich Viking heritage have come world-renowned explorers Thor Heyerdahl and Fridtjof Nansen, and of course Roald Amundsen, who was first to reach the South Pole. My grandfather was born in 1864 in the Gudbrandsdal Valley, which is close to Lillehammer, and he was the son of Anders and Gorina Quveli. He was the eldest of 7 children, and he lived on a large gore, which is a farm estate. It's G-A-A-R-D. This wonderful old horse came from that gore. It was carved over 250 years ago, and the Quevelis brought it with them to this country. Generations of children have ridden on it, including all of my own, and it still has the wooden pegs, the original wooden pegs in the wheels, and it makes a marvelous sound, which is like the tears to children. I meant to tell you that a gore is a large farm estate. There's one central house, and that is surrounded by outbuildings, storage sheds, and smithies, and places where they do the weaving and spinning, and barns, of course. And most of the buildings are raised up. Those of you who have been in Norway have seen the raised buildings on pedestals so the mice won't get in. When my husband and I made our first trip to Norway in 1957, one of our goals was to find the old Quveli gore, because of course the family had all immigrated years before. So we went to Lillehammer, where I have an uncle who was a wonderful local historian. And when he knew, when my mother wrote and said we were coming, he took a lot of time, looked up old records, and found the original gore, which of course has been divided up into many farms now. But it's beautiful. You drive up through this wonderful green valley above a huge lake, and the day that we drove up, it had been raining, which is just as typical for Norway as it is here. And there was this stunning rainbow that stretched over the whole valley. And we felt as if we were going to kind of find the pot of gold. And we did, because the families who had been the tenant farmers on the farm so long ago all had their own farms. And it's very usual for people who are working a farm, or in medieval times this was, and up through the 18th century, to take the name or an aberration of the name of the owner. So many of them had a name very similar to Quveli. It was like Quveli, and most of them knew their own history and knew they'd been part of this farm, and they welcomed us with huge colt boar, which is like a smorgasbord, and were so hospitable. The family emigrated in 1869 to Minnesota, where so many Scandinavians settled, and Anders was a pharmacist, and he practiced his pharmacy trade, and he also opened a large mercantile store. All 7 children, my grandfather was one of 7, and all 7 children excelled in education, graduated from universities, and went on to get higher degrees in education, even the 4 girls, and that was very, very unusual for that time. Kristen attended St. Olaf College and graduated in 1880 with a degree of medicine. And he immediately went to Europe, and for the next 3 years he studied in Norway and in England, and particularly in Vienna, Austria, which at that time was the center of science in Europe. He visited Norway several times and visited his relatives, and he used to tell me that his greatest thrill was visiting his nephew, Einar Lunda, who was a great friend of Grieg. And young Chris heard Grieg play in private concert at Lunda's home, and he said he would never forget it. After 3 years, he came back to this country, and in 1888, when he was just 24, he came to Tacoma. He was probably attracted by the similarity of the country around here to the part of Norway where he came from, and also the fact that Tacoma was going to be the terminus for the Northern Pacific Railroad. At this time, I'd like to depart from the usual chronological format and read to you a paper on the Quevelis that I wrote for the Aloha Club, which is an old club in Tacoma. And my grandmother and mother were Aloans. And I think it gives you a little bit of the flavor as well as the history of what the family was like. Whenever I think of my Quveli grandparents and their offspring, I think of terms like larger than life, vigorous, unique, and colorful. An old family friend and former Aloha president once likened the Qvelis to a Mahler symphony. All-encompassing, she said. Is that ringing, buzzing? What do I do?
It's the paper.
It's the paper.
Oh, it's the paper. Okay, maybe there we go. All right, thank you. All-encompassing, she said, overwhelming and played with full orchestra. Growing up in Tacoma with the name Quveli was like possessing a magic carpet, an entree into a wonderful and amusing group of stories of the past that to me were more fantastic than any fairy tale. Helen Murray was always urging me to write a book about the Qvelis. In her inimitable style, she loved to regale me with stories of my grandmother, whom she greatly admired. They shared a mutual love for art and drama, often working together on little theater productions and Aloha dramatic productions, and they each appreciated each other's wonderful sense of humor. Paige Hosmer, dear family friend, Alohan, and longtime editor of the Society column in the Tacoma Ledger, claimed that her favorite columns were those chronicling the unique lifestyle, entertainments, and travels of the Quveli household. As I recently paged through historic scrapbooks in minutes, I was struck by how many guest days and special events were held at Quveli Gore, or one of the other spacious Quveli homes. In April 1934, Paige Hosmer wrote for the Coma Ledger describing an Aloha dinner event honoring husbands and archly entitled Frolics to quote, "The spacious rooms of Quveli Gore in Lakeview were beautifully decorated for the affair. A symphony of azures, great bowls of lilacs and iris enhanced the old blue appointments in the drawing room. Two of the Quveli daughters, Mrs. Brewster Morgan and her sister Marie Louise, both of New York, presented a cycle of songs from foreign lands, singing in French, Spanish, German, and Norwegian. As their concluding song, they gave a clever bit of satire on modern, it was then 1934, so that's how modern it was, conditions, entitled, My Father is a Racketeer, a song originated by Mina Quveli and introduced most successfully at a winter cabaret. Two special characteristics dominated stories of my grandparents: their generosity to everyone whose lives they touched, and their lifelong fascination with and pursuit of education. One of my grandfather's favorite sayings was, "The only true aristocracy in this world is the aristocracy of education." Life at the various Quveli homes over the years was enormously active, rich in unusual experience, culturally uplifting, and often hilariously funny. In the eye of the hurricane was my grandmother, Marie Quveli, Maudie to her close friends, and she's the one at the end of the table there. Talented, artistic, incredibly energetic, she could also be overbearingly bossy, but her enormous generosity and her unconventional views drew individuals from all walks of life and all ages. The Quveli home was always a whirl, awash, and alive with fascinating personalities, scientists, politicians, artists, musicians, and explorers who came to visit from all over the world. The enormous walnut dining table acquired from a monastery refectory outside Vienna, aglow with candles, beautifully appointed with one of grandmother's smashing floral arrangements, and crowded with a cosmopolitan company of guests from all over the world, was usually alive with an interesting blend of several foreign languages. Presiding over the delectable continental cuisine was delightful Tina, the family cook who came with the Quevelis from her native Vienna in 1910 and stayed to serve me breakfast on my wedding day in 1952. All of the Quveli servants were of long, loyal duration. They had to be very flexible souls who could cope with a bevy of house guests or an unexpected dinner for 50 at the drop of a hat. They all stayed on through many years, not only because they loved and were dearly loved by the Quevelis, but I think because they relished the excitement and justifiably felt that life elsewhere might pale in comparison. On the top or attic floor of whatever house they occupied, there was always the well-equipped studio for my Aunt Mina's current artistic endeavors, whether it be sculpture or oil, and next door a sewing room chock full of beautiful exotic fabrics where a seamstress sat, daily turning out creations designed by my grandmother and my three aunts. Grandmother had an artist's eye and a true flair for decoration. Her homes were unique, unconventional, and conventional and charming, filled with wonderful items from all over the world. Her colors were the blues and greens of nature, a reflection of her magnificent flower gardens, where blue was the dominating color. 7-foot-high delphiniums, iris, thick, brilliant cornflowers, forget-me-not beds 3 feet wide and 40 feet long supplied her household. She was famous for her green thumb and for her spectacular flower arrangements with masses of cobalt delphiniums, scarlet poppies, camas from the prairie, and fragrant lilacs, artfully arranged in enormous copper bowls and huge standing brass floor vases. There were always plans going on for some major entertainment at Quveli Gore, an elegant tea, a masked ball, a benefit for a struggling artist, a civic cause, or an Aloha Day. Grandmother Quveli, Maudie, established what in educated European circles was known as a salon, a gathering place for the exchange of ideas, viewpoints, and artistic accomplishments. With her keen perception and deep appreciation of the arts, she became a sort of mentor and sponsor for many a struggling and talented young artist. Russian sculptor,